Right. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Sullivan. I'm the chair of the Oregon Board of Accountancy. I'm calling this special public meeting of the State of Oregon Board of Accountancy to order. Today is Monday, August 26th, 2024, and it is 12:01 p.m. This meeting is being held by Zoom only. Members of staff and the public may be present by Zoom or in person at the board offices on 200 Hawthorne Avenue Southeast, Suite D, 450, Salem, Oregon, 97301. This meeting is being recorded. If you are participating in this meeting by Zoom, please be sure to mute your microphone and unmute only when you are called upon to speak. Please do not use the chat room for any discussions. Should any technical issues arise, the meeting will be paused until they are resolved. I'll now take a roll call of members and guests. I am just going to go around the room as I see them on my screen to keep this in an orderly fashion. So Martin, I'll start with you.
Martin Piccioni, present at the board office.
Thank you. Raul?
Raul Valdivia, Vice Chair via Zoom.
Thank you. Logan?
Logan Steele, board member via Zoom.
Perfect. Jason Robinson.
Jason Robinson, board treasurer via Zoom.
You, Sherry?
Sherry McPherson via Zoom, OSCPA guest.
Okay. Thanks for coming, Sherry. Megan?
Thank you.
Megan Hartley, board member via Zoom.
Megan. Haley?
Haley Lyons, board member via Zoom.
Okay. Angie?
Angie Hunt, board legal counsel via Zoom.
Perfect. Dr. Ulmer?
Elizabeth Ulmer, chair of Pipeline Committee via Zoom. I'm a guest at this meeting.
Perfect. Thank you for coming. Jason Orm?
Jason Orm, chair of the Laws and Rules Committee via Zoom, guest of this meeting.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Jason. Amanda?
Amanda Fells, OAIA representative. I'm a guest at this meeting.
Great. Thank you for coming, Amanda. Andrew, and then anyone else that's with you.
Andrew Barlow, board staff in the office, but present by Zoom.
Okay, thank you. Jeremiah?
Jeremiah Leppert, board staff by Zoom.
Okay, I think that's everybody that I can see. Have I left anybody out? Okay, not hearing anybody, and I'll just, again, for the record, Joe Sullivan, board chair. So we'll move on to item number 2, which is agenda review and approval. Everyone's had a chance to review that. So could I have a motion to approve, assuming everybody's had a chance to approve the agenda as proposed, or does any member have a motion to amend the agenda?
I make a motion to approve it as presented.
And I second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none. Abstentions? Hearing none. Motion passes. All right, we'll keep moving then. Item number 3, public comment. So if there's any members of the public who wish to comment, please raise your hand in the room or use the Zoom raise hand feature. If I call on you for comment, you will be permitted to address the board for a maximum of 3 minutes, and staff will unmute you so you can speak. As chair, I reserve the right to end your comment early and have staff mute you if your comment does not pertain to the authority given to this board by the legislature to regulate the CPA profession and public accountancy firms in this state. So with that said, any public comment? Not seeing any. So we will keep on moving. We will go to item number 4, which is a chair report. And usually I'm pretty brief. Today is probably the exception, which I do have several items. Probably the biggest one is, well, definitely the most important thing is, I know the board is all aware, and probably everyone on this call, but just wanted to publicly acknowledge the passing of Stu Morris, our board member and our friend. Stu was obviously a longtime board member and made huge contributions and service to our profession. So I know his service is coming up on September 7th. Martin, thank you for earlier this month making the effort to visit him while he was in hospice, visit with his family. I know that you have made arrangements to be at his service as well. So if anyone else would like to attend, I know we can get anyone the details. My hope is that we can find some way as a board to do something to kind of honor his legacy as well, that we can discuss in more detail at our next board meeting. But I just wanted to publicly acknowledge that. You know, I know everybody's aware of that as well. But beyond that, anyway, more, and more optimistic news, I guess, a board recruitment update. We are, building a pool with the governor's office. We currently have 2 applicants. One we all know, Tanya Moffett, who is our current BOAC chair, partner at Marina and Company. The other is Michael Mead, who is the managing partner of Clifton Larson Allen here at the Lake Oswego office in Oregon. So, and are we currently looking to build that pool, Martin?
Yes, we are, Mr. Chair. So anyone that has other ideas, we have a commitment, and I've also worked with Sherry closely on this. We have a commitment to the governor's office because we've had a couple of run-throughs, both with the prior governor and the current governor, where we really didn't have more than one person for each one of the opportunities where the governor had a chance to appoint someone to the board. And we now really need to kind of come through and build a stronger pool for appointments that will be coming up, at least one appointment at minimum that will be coming up next year. So we have some time, but it is also a bit of a process. So if anyone else has other ideas or recommendations, please reach out to either Joe or I so that we can do further recruitments for the pool. And happy to also touch base with you. I don't know that I've had a chance to discuss it with you a lot, Amanda, over on the OAIA side, but this is kind of a longer term project over the next 4 or 5 months to really get some solid applicants into the governor's office.
Okay. Right. Thanks, Martin. Any questions, comments on the board recruitment process? Okay, not hearing any, so I'll just keep moving. 4B, which is kind of board chair actions, just keeping everybody up to speed. The first item is just the 2025 through 27 budget, and just wanted to make sure everybody aware I did authorize Martin to submit the agency request budget for the 2025 through 27 budget on August 1st. And that's consistent with the board's priorities. We'll cover this in more detail at the next regular board meeting, but just wanted to make sure that everybody's aware of that. And then item number 2 is one other piece, and as board chair, I had the ability to do this in light of Martin's performance review in June. I was able to approve an extra 40 hours of PTO for Martin. I felt comfortable as board chair approving that without taking this to a vote in public session. I kind of felt comfortable that everybody on the board would be okay with that. Don't like speaking for the board, but in this case, I felt pretty comfortable that we'd all be on the same page. But I wanted to make sure that you're all aware of that as well.
Mr. Chair, so beyond a quick thank you for doing that, I also wanted to, I forgot to write in the comments to get you ready for this board meeting that one of the things that drove this, that the board also should be aware of, is that we had a changeover in HR advisor that drove the timing in all of this. So the person that kind of got us through the whole review process and the performance review process, Reba, who's been at a number of board meetings, Rebecca Dunnington, Reba, is no longer assigned to the Board of Accountancy. So Joe and I were trying to get this stuff through the process before the new advisor came on. The new advisor's name, just for the record, is Sherry Lauer. There's potentially one board member other than you, Joe, on here that may recognize her. If you were working with us back in 2017, she was briefly assigned to us for about a year in 2017 as part of another transition. So she's not unfamiliar with me or the agency, and that's super helpful. So sorry, Joe, I forgot to write that angle in to your notes.
Yeah, no problem. But yeah, that was part of, I was just approving that as board chair from an efficiency standpoint. It just kind of streamlined getting that done. And I felt comfortable the board would be on the same page there. So moving on, I think in the materials we have an agenda for the annual NASBA meeting, which is October 27th through the 30th in Orlando, Florida. So just wanted everybody, I don't need an answer trying to, from past experience, I know when you try to get a commitment to attend a meeting across the country, if several months out is kind of difficult to do. So what I'm hoping to do is everyone can look at their calendars, see if they have the ability to attend this, and then I will approve anybody that can go in advance of that, that they're authorized to go to that meeting. And you can work with Martin and staff for the registration, hotel, and airfare from there. So hoping that the Oregon board has good representation. And I believe Haley, you've already committed to going, correct? And you are my designated voter. So.
Oh, good, because in the registration, it asked if I was, and I was like, yeah.
Yes, they followed up with me on that. I got a kick out of it. And I said, yes, she
That's
absolutely is. So that was confirmed. So again, everybody, please check your calendars. We're approving anybody that has the ability to go, and better representation from the state of Oregon, the better. Any questions on that? Not seeing any, so we'll keep on moving to item number 5, new business. 5A, the overview of developments since the July 17th board meeting. So we have NASBA updates with the UAA committee August 2nd meeting and the PLTF webinar on August 22nd, which was just last week. So Martin, you want to cover that?
Yes. So in essence, what's transpired here is that we had anticipated at the last meeting that the UAA process would start up on August 2nd. I was initially a bit optimistic. It became a bit of a roller coaster ride. Optimistic simply because the UAA process was finally starting. I did then hear after the August 2nd meeting, I heard back that it was not, let's just say, not an easy committee meeting with a lot of very divergent opinions, not just on the substance of issues, but even what the role of the UAA committee was. And so I lost a little bit of hope in terms of what all may come out of that UAA process. However, there was a webinar that NASBA ran. I don't know if any one of you was, all of you should have gotten an invite. There was a webinar from NASBA last Thursday, kind of updating us where they are. And inside that webinar, one of the key pieces of information was that the UAA process went from basically dormant for a few years to starting with that August 2nd meeting, as difficult as it was, to actually meeting multiple times a week with, I think, about 10 UAA committee meetings between now and September 4, which is a pretty stunning turnaround. And I'm glad that they're doing that, because as much as there is a relatively happy face being put out nationally, all of this, I do know that there is a significant amount of dissent that's still there at the UAA committee level, which makes it a little bit less likely for us that we will actually get help with true consensus language coming out nationally. What we will have, which is helpful one way or the other, is there is now an elevated chance that with them having scheduled meetings up until September 4, so that's I think Wednesday next week, that we will have at least an idea of, is there a consensus coming out of the UAA in some way, whether it's on open mobility or on other language that we can incorporate in terms of final feedback to Legislative Council. There's now a good chance that we will at least know what's coming out of there, if anything, by the time our September 26th board meeting occurs. At the LRC stage, which is what we're about to work on in item 5C, essentially what we had to do with Jason Orm's, under Jason Orm's leadership and with a lot of help from Angie's, essentially work through how we could rewrite our pieces in the absence of any kind of a real likelihood that there's a consensus that's going to come out nationally. The second piece that you should know as board members is that when that webinar occurred on Thursday was also the first time that there was a public acknowledgement that the UAA committee, the Uniform Accountancy Act committee, which just to remind board members is a joint committee of AICPA and NASBA, will actually be talking about the open mobility option, i.e. a version of mobility that is not based on substantial equivalency, because currently the entire construct of mobility across state lines is based on substantial equivalency of a licensing standard. That was a pretty big shift because up until now, at least on the regulatory side, and I believe to quite a similar degree on the association side, essentially the message was we're not even allowed to talk about open mobility in the sense that when the first discussions came up primarily at the executive director's level of decoupling mobility in the interest of protecting mobility, decoupling mobility from substantial equivalency, it was considered basically heresy. Well, we've moved from heresy to it's now being discussed at the UAA committee level. So that's progress, right? So we have progress on a number of fronts. One, they're meeting. Number two, open mobility is at least part of the discussion, even though there is absolutely no consensus right now on how that actually should look like. And so that's a huge step. That's a huge step forward with respect to where things are at nationally. And then the other piece that's happened that came out at the webinar, which was pretty huge, is you will recall that in the prior briefings, and that's, of course, I'm accepting you, Megan, because a lot of that happened prior to the June board meeting, right? The initial vision of that additional licensure pathway that came out nationally was extremely complicated. You will recall what kind of came out there in last, I think it was September or October, that was very, very, very bureaucratic, required firms to register, didn't have an option for the for anything outside public accounting firms. There was just a lot of stuff that just didn't work. Well, there's been a lot of iterations here that I'm not going to review, right? Where we ended up on Thursday was actually pretty surprising, because on Thursday, what happened is that essentially the Professional Licensure Task Force communicated that what they're really looking for in terms of what they've shifted toward in terms of their additional licensure pathway at the 120 semester hour level is something that they use the term enhanced experience that would provide, and I'm using again their terms, guardrails around supervised experience. That, what they really mean by that actually are standards around supervised experience. And what that means is effectively and ironically, what's happened now is that they've listened a great deal, and they deserve credit for that, to try to make things less complex. And where they've now ended up at the current stage of discussion is actually moving a lot closer where Oregon and Washington are by basically saying their vision of enhanced experience, this new licensure pathway that they're willing to craft for us in the UAA, essentially looks a lot like the requirements that basically the 7 competencies that we have in our supervised experience pathway. And in fact, we know for a fact that both the PLTF initially and then later on the association side, they were quite thrilled to discover what all we had developed here in Oregon for quite some time. Now, their approach is still a little different than ours, because ours, very simply put, is when we are talking about supervised experience toward licensure, we have these standards in place no matter what. We have them at the 150+1 model now, and we're certainly contemplating doing exactly the same thing, going to a bachelor or a bachelor +2 pathway with those standards, right? At the NASBA level, at the PLTF level, they're talking about having those standards only at the BA level, at the 120 level for 1 out of the 2 years of that supervised experience. So I've pointed out to them that that's probably a little bit of a hard argument to make about having supervised experience both with and without standards. But for us, it's great news because they're basically moving in our direction. So that part of it is good news for us because things are actually moving closer to how we're doing business. There's still substantial gaps between what we're talking about in item C below, in our action items here, and what the current discussion is at, because NASBA is not yet super comfortable with anything really related to this open mobility piece, unless there's a specific NASBA angle in it, nor are they very comfortable yet with anything other than a semester hour specific approach. So this move away from specific hours to a bachelor's degree plus 2 years experience, a master's degree plus 1 year experience is not something that's in the comfort zone yet, but things are moving, and they're moving ever so slightly more chaotically in our direction. So that's overall, it's encouraging. There is definitely, it's messy, but there is motion. And it's not entirely without hope. So that's essentially my super high level summary of where we're at with the ongoing kind of fluidity of the national discussion. So that's kind of what gets us to kind of the background for our work session and item C and D. And I don't know what Joe, if you want to briefly deal with the scholarship piece before we delve in, but that's kind of sequentially the way we have it on the agenda. But that's all I have to report in terms of national developments just since the last board meeting.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think we can, but any questions on what you already covered? Questions, comments from anyone? And one other thing, just before we move on, I think we had 2 more guests join us while you were speaking. Martin, I think Rachel and Marcus, I think TAC representatives, would you mind just taking yourselves off mute and just announcing yourselves for the record, please?
Rachel Reardon with PwC.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Joe. Marcus Rayner with PwC, and I also represent TAC, the Accountants Coalition.
Okay, perfect. Thank you both for joining us. Yeah, so Martin, yeah, go ahead. I guess before we just move into kind of these action items, you just want to cover more of the scholarship piece, and then we can kind of dive in.
Yeah, so the scholarship piece really is before you as a formal action item because we've done a ton of work since the last board meeting. I just had to pull it out separately because this one's gonna really should get a motion. Where we've done work, and Elizabeth, please feel free to speak up because you and Angie and actually Melissa Cunningham, who I want to call out, was in the tax section over at the Oregon Department of Justice and was specifically assigned to us to help us craft this thing from the get-go. We've had really, really good experience there drafting this. I will be honest with all of you, my computer is completely on the fritz right now, so I'm covering everything off the top of my head and can't look at anything. So the piece, the PDF that you have there is a formal first draft from Legislative Council that essentially already reflects quite a bit of back and forth we had with our drafter. We feel really good about where it's at because it essentially legislatively enshrines our ability without having to go back to the legislature to be able to fund accounting scholarships. Because that authority we currently don't have in statute, right? You don't see any monetary amounts in there. That's something that was kind of indirectly discussed at prior board meetings and indirectly covered by Joe earlier in his chair report, because there is a very specific item in the agency request budget that's currently at $1 million of our reserves that are being proposed through the budget process, essentially to go toward that activity in this upcoming 2-year budget cycle. So we are kind of in kind of the best of all places with respect to this piece. Elizabeth, Dr. Ulmer, is there anything that you want to add just from being involved in this, just from your side of the equation about kind of what that kind of stood out to you as we were crafting language?
Yeah, I think that one of the parts that we as a committee and then again with the legislative folks were discussing quite a bit is that if for any of you whose HR folks use the recruitment funnel discussion in your organizations, we were really trying to view this as a recruitment funnel. How can we get the largest number of students interested in accounting and support them? So for example, so it's not at all uncommon for a student to say, I'm going to start out with my accounting clerk, and then they start getting sucked in and they realize what the opportunities are if they continue their education. So we want to be able to, we wanted to have this written in such a way that the language was broad enough that it was not restricted to the level of degree being pursued, working on the theory that the more people we get into accounting broadly, the more folks that we can hopefully move in to pursuing a CPA. So I think that's really the one piece that when you look at this legislation, you may wonder, why is it written so broad? But I'm happy to answer any other questions as well.
Okay. Any other questions from the board, comments?
The one other thing I would mention while folks might be thinking about any other questions is that Martin mentioned the $1 million. One thing that Martin and I have discussed that we will be coming back to the board to kind of get some feedback on is thoughts on how quickly these funds should be pushed out to the OSCPA Educational Foundation. So it's highly unlikely that $1 million could be absorbed in 1 year. There's also the question of to what extent might the board think that it's a good idea to put some of this in an endowment to provide scholarships in perpetuity. So it's kind of a balance between how quickly do we want to try to get folks out to deal with this pipeline crisis versus trying to really create a sustainable source of funding to pursue the CPA. So that's just tuck that away. And again, the timeline for this is that we would be granting in spring of 2026 for the 26-27 academic year. So this is as fast as we can push this puppy out.
That's the only sad part about it, right?
I would agree 100%, Joe. And,
Yeah.
you know, and two, you know, Martin has shared with me, you know, a little more granular on that timeline. There may be some stickiness in 2026 in spring 2026 because of the timeline for when the universities issue scholarships and when we actually can grant these scholarships. So just know that's in the background as well. So that first year, we are really looking at probably a year where not as much would be feasible to push out because it's a matter of recruiting students to apply for these.
Yeah, it's almost like can we design a program where we're taking applications before we've actually have the money?
Well, we are, thanks to Sherry and her team.
Good. That's what I hope the answer is. So as soon as the money's there, it's being deployed. If that gives you kind of a hint on my thoughts on how I personally, not speaking for the entire board, I would, and I know that's not the discussion today, but I would like to see a large chunk of that deployed as quickly as possible for specifically this pipeline issue. So that's my personal kind of opinion on that, is how do we help as many students as possible, you know, remove hurdles in getting into this career. Raul, yeah, go ahead, you're on.
I have a question in regards to the timeline and how, you know, what did you say, 27?
26-27 academic year. Okay.
So what if someone is in the middle of school right now and they're going to be done before then, but you're accepting applications now?
No. To be clear, we're not accepting applications. What I was referring to is Sherry and her team doing the back end work to ensure that their scholarship application system can support the criteria that we're providing guidance on, because it would be a different set, completely different set of criteria. And also really starting to build a marketing plan around this. Believe it or not, you know, you would think that students would clamor for scholarships. And at least, you know, we find the same thing at PSU. Scholarship, our scholarship system is not as user-friendly as we would hope it is. I don't know if Logan finds that as well at Oregon State, but it can be difficult for students to navigate sometimes. And the OSCPA, in the years that I've been involved with the foundation, many years doesn't have enough applicants to meet criteria. Now, part of our goal with this scholarship program with the surplus Board of Accountancy funds is to make those criteria somewhat less restrictive, since it is a needs-based scholarship. So there can be scholarships with the OSCPA Foundation, for example, that is, you know, somebody's from Eastern Oregon, or PSU has ones that are a single mom, things like that. So we're trying to make it broader, again, just encouraging students. There's no shortage of need. There's a shortage of awareness and time. And I will just say this, I think for at least PSU's population, belief that they would actually receive a scholarship.
So, Mr. Chair, just from a technical perspective, I want to just point out to folks, now that my computer has come back to life, Section 4 of the document, so page 2 of the actual text document, actually gives you a bit of a hint as to why we have an emergency clause on that bill, to make sure that we can start working things on the back end after the legislature closes right away, meaning this bill has an effective clause of July 1, 2025, because that buys us a half year of extra time to actually be able to start working things in the fall of 2025. Otherwise, we'd be stuck with needing to scramble this through in January and February of 26, which would be really too late for any effects there to happen for the 26-27 year. So there's a little bit of that connect on the timeline. And then beyond that, there's probably a lot to discuss here. I will probably recommend we do that at the September board meeting, because today our charge here is really limited to, is there anything in here that language-wise gives anybody concern? Because this is now the formal stage, the only time we get to have feedback back to Legislative Council that says, board, reviewed it. Are you good with this? Is there any, and does anyone see any last minute needs for any tweaks on the language? Is kind of the very narrow task for today. And then all the policy and timing stuff, we have a little bit more time on.
Right. Yeah, understood. And yeah, outside of the timing, which isn't under our control, unfortunately, it makes sense to me. Any questions, comments, or revisions from anyone on the board?
I think it's really strong. I like how it preserves our flexibility, and the items spelled out seem reasonable, required, no-brainers, I guess. So it's excellent.
Right. Okay. And assuming that's the case, I would just I'd be looking for a motion to approve the legislative concept as drafted.
I am moved to approve the legislative concept as drafted.
A second.
Perfect. We have a motion. We have a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none. Abstentions? Hearing none. Motion passes.
Thank you, everyone. This is a very exciting initiative.
Yeah. Yes. And thank you for all the hard work that went into that. We're excited to move this forward. So thank you very much. Right. We will keep moving here on to item number 5C. So work session recommendations from the August 19th LRC meeting. So draft Public Accountancy Act changes. I think we have those in our materials. Jason Orm, do you want to lead us through those?
Certainly. So after working together as a committee, spending time, Martin, I, and Angie did drafting, and it will go from here to Legislative Council for drafting of what will actually hit the legislature. But what I'd like to do is just hit highlights with Martin and Angie chiming in to where I miss something or leave something out. I love what you have before you for consideration. The way Angie drafted it, it's simple. I'm a tax guy. I don't live with simple statute. This is simple statute. So we did a couple of things that the big highlights, and I assume everybody has had a chance to look at the document. Big highlights are there's 3 ways to be licensed as far as education and experience. Bachelor's plus 2 years of experience with the standards that are already in Oregon law, no change there. Master's degree plus 1 year of experience, supervised experience. And we left in the 150 semester hour plus 1 because we may have candidates that have a bachelor's degree and have their 150, but it's not a master's, or are getting close to 150, and that's quicker than a master's. We didn't want to leave them out in the cold. So we've left that pathway in as well. Under 673.050, there's a paragraph down under 2, and this is for qualification for admission to CPA exam. It's a fairly simple, broad sentence. The board may deny any application for admission to CPA exam as prescribed by board rule. What that is there for is to give the board the ability that if I have felony convictions on my record, it gives the board ability to have some pause there as to whether or not I should be able to sit for the exam without calling out specific things in statute. So that's just some guardrails there. We talked about the bachelor's +2, master's +1, 150 hours. That's in 673,095. The next section, we made a change. We discussed this, I think, with the board before, and this is with regard to lapsed licenses. And expired licenses. We made it a little bit easier, again, based on what the board would like to do. It's all within your power. For someone with an expired license to come back, they can come back if there was a reasonable cause for the expiration. Reasonable cause is defined by the board. But the thing that's now out of statute is if my license has been expired for 6 years under existing law, if I want my license back, I get to sit the exam again. That requirement is no longer in this draft. So I would keep my exam, I would keep the status of having passed the exam. We hope that that will make some difference to some folks. This also goes through with regard to ability to practice between states, mobility. The one thing we did here is that's a little bit different. Again, this is all new language that you had the opportunity to read, all the new proposed language, is the very last sentence on that draft. It's item 6 under 153. So what 153 says is that if I hold a license in Idaho, I can practice in Oregon. I'm subject to Oregon's board if they want, I agree to be subject to you. But on the flip side, you're probably going to kick it back and make Idaho deal with me if I've misbehaved. So that item 6 is a guardrail. With all of the changes going on, we wanted the board to have the ability by rule, if some state goes way off the rails and says, okay, we're going to allow someone with a high school degree to sit for and be licensed as a CPA with 1 year of experience. Totally making something up. That's below our PA standards right now. It gives the board to say, great, glad you're a CPA in that state. You don't meet our requirements. And it's not blackballing that state. It's focusing on the candidate and that they would need specifically they would need specific education or experience requirements to then be licensed here. That's executive summary of what we did. And again, Angie's drafting was fabulous. And we present that to the board for your consideration. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you for walking us through that, Jason. Questions, comments from the board? I know we had that in advance of today's meeting. Haley, did you have a?
I just had a question about the definition of client and the inclusivity of, it says client means a person who agrees with a licensee or employer of a licensee to receive any professional service from the licensee or employer of a licensee. So this gets us to the, CPA, that's a CFO, and is their employer the client? And then we sort of run Angie, and then we run afoul of the practice of public accountancy, which I know we don't want to talk about, but it's
Sorry, I didn't. I put that in there in my draft because this is actually what it says in statute right now. This is verbatim what's in statute right now.
Okay, right.
And I put it in there because I hate it, and then I promptly forgot to work on it.
Okay,
so I haven't touched it.
Got it. Okay, good. Yeah, I was like, I think this is what it currently says, but I couldn't figure out what the change was, and I was like, I think we hate this.
Yeah, yeah.
So
we agree on that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
About how to fix it though is a different.
Okay. I don't know either. I just was like, my question was going to be, it looks like we didn't change this. So is there justification for that? Because we talk about how much we hate it all the time.
Right.
Sounds
Yes.
good. Okay, thank you.
So we can still keep it on the radar to change it. You know, like we're kind of, and Martin can kind of explain where we are at in the process. This doesn't have to be, we're not at the place yet for these where this has to be completely, you know, 100% done. This is like just sort of like a overview of what you guys are looking at, thinking like generally this is, you know, where you want to go and everybody's sort of aligned with that. And so I will keep that on my radar as something to keep thinking about and working on in between now and when it has to be sort of finalized. And if anybody has any thoughts, feel free to chime in.
That's actually super helpful because I'll be honest that the client piece wasn't on my radar yet. I had somehow missed that piece. So Haley, thank you for speaking up on that issue, because it sounds like either with or without the LRC, we're gonna need to pick that up at the September board meeting, because the September board meeting, just to kind of clarify the process piece, after this meeting is when Angie and I need to sit down and actually send all the language pieces that includes essentially the licensing stuff that you have in front of you, plus any amendments we will make today, plus all the other pieces that we've previously brought to the board around public accountancy changes, whether it's board composition, inactive licensure, you know, all of those pieces. All that stuff has to go to Ledge Council and will go to Ledge Council for drafting for the first time. Then we will have, you know, essentially we get to have informal backs and forth with Ledge Council, which is a huge present and has been hugely helpful to us. But she is under a deadline because she has to get her work, meaning her first formal drafts, approved or edited and back into her final hopper by the beginning of October. So what that means is we will have something in front of us on September 26th that essentially reflects the next phase of work with Ledge Council, and that will give us one more opportunity to tackle things like the client piece and potentially going back to the other topic. Do we want to tinker with the what Jason referred to as item 6 under ORS 673-153, which is the what I liked, you know, I like using simple terms, the escape hatch language for open mobility, which is probably one of the most kind of important pieces for us to discuss today, not necessarily with respect to having to hammer out the language, but I think this was kind of a big deal, kind of policy issue, number one, because nationally there's still a lot of fights around how best to protect mobility. This, per prior discussion at the board level, gets us very close to essentially saying we think that the best way to preserve mobility is open mobility and uncoupling it from substantial equivalency. At the LRC level, item 6 essentially reflects that there was consensus on we need some version of an escape hatch if a state goes rogue, right? There was not exactly a consensus at the LRC level that it has to be this exact language. So there's going to be probably some more discussion around that piece on September 26th, particularly also once we know where the UAA is at. So I hope that clarifies things at least a little bit process-wise in terms of where we're at today and what the ask is today, because what we don't want to have happen out of today is getting something into the process of really first draft with Legislative Council where the board says we're not comfortable with that.
Yeah. Thank you, Martin. And yeah, Haley, just to reiterate, I appreciate that comment as well. I know that we've struggled with that, and when we deal with investigations, I know our colleagues in the profession have struggled with that language over the years, a lot. So that is something I feel like we should take up, even if we move forward. So my understanding, just to make sure I understand that correct, is that we can still move forward today, but we can still pick that piece back up. Okay, good to know. So
Angie, can I just ask you, I'm going to put you on the spot here for a second, since we know we're going to, since we know this is the exact language that's in statute now, and we don't yet know what it is that we want to change, should we just take it out of there so we don't suggest that this is a solution?
Yeah, and actually
remove it
I
from the
meant,
draft?
yeah, right. I meant to do that before I sent it to
Okay.
you. So I actually didn't mean for that to be in there at all.
Okay.
I'm gonna blame you because you pushed me to get it to you faster, so it's your fault.
Yes, no, that's okay. Any amount of deflection you need for your comfort zone, you've more than earned it by drafting this. And folks, can I just at least briefly call out, if you compare this to what we have in statute now, which is a really confusing amalgam of permits and certificates and licenses, and one's sounds a lot like the other, but is really not like the other. And it's really, really difficult to follow. There's a whole lot of streamlining here that happened behind the scenes to make this easier. So I just want to say, I'm really, really excited that Angie was willing to do that, and that leadership was willing to say, hey, let's go beyond the policy direction and also see if we can make this simpler for everybody. And there's a lot that's happened there, and I'm really grateful that that we're doing that, and that Angie was willing to put that work in, because it is a lot of work. And just in the interest of full disclosure, there is language that is not in front of you that will be impacted by this approach, not at the policy level, but simply technical cleanups in other section of the statutes where words like certificates and permits need to come out and be replaced by the term license, for example, and other such trickle downs, right? So we want to make sure that conceptually you're on board with what you have in front of you, but I also want to be really clear and transparent that there are trickle effects from what you're looking at into other sections of statutes that will impact ultimately drafting and will impact the overall picture that you'll see on September 26th, because on September 26th, you're going to see the whole draft. It's the whole enchilada as it would need to go to the legislature that we then get to review and potentially edit.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Any additional questions, comments from the board? Okay, not seeing any. So we can move on to item number D, which is kind of the action step here, which would be the authorization then to submit the draft Public Accounts Act changes to the legislative drafter here. So be looking for a motion to approve submitting language to the Legislative Council as drafted. And that's what we'd be looking for. So, we don't have any amendments that we discussed, so.
I stepped on Jason's toes last time. So
yeah. I normally try to say it so somebody could say as or so moved, but no one ever takes me up on it.
So moved.
There we go. Yeah.
Nice. I second.
All right. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none. Abstentions? Hearing none. Motion passes. Okay.
Pretty cool to see it actually in like a form. We've been talking about it for a while. It's pretty awesome to see everything kind of coming to fruition. So thanks to everyone for their hard work on that.
Yes, I echo those comments. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Angie. Thank you to the entire LRC and for your time and efforts in making this happen. All right, we'll keep on moving. We'll try to have some found time here. I know that we have till 2 o'clock blocked out on our calendars. I was thinking no way we're going to get there. So to 2, but item number E, I think, Martin, we have a brief report on renewal season.
Yeah. Andrew, do you want to jump in here? Otherwise, I'll just cover what we heard at Huddle this morning.
Yeah. As of this morning, we have about 600 active renewals left. About 200 inactive, and the rest retired to finish processing by the 30th.
Yeah, so we're very, very close. It's going to be a bit of a scramble this week, kind of all hands on deck, but it is going to be the first renewal season since, I believe, at least 2021, if not earlier, where we're actually going to be able to get through our stuff by the official lapse date. Or at least we'll get very, very close. Those of you that have been through our kind of staffing changes and kind of our struggles with kind of getting back up on the feet operationally, you may recall that back in 2022, it took us all the way until the end of January to get through the renewal season. And then it got better, you know, in the last cycle, in the 23 cycle, but we were still several months, a couple months behind. And this time, you know, we're going to get very close to on time. If not, you know, maybe we're going to be off by a day or 2, but it's going to be super close.
Perfect. Thank you for the updates. And it's great to see the progress being made as well. All right, that leads us to item number 6, which is announcements and adjournment. So next regular board meeting will be Thursday, September 26th. So I think everyone has that on their calendars. And so with that, I will declare the public meeting of the Board of Accounts is adjourned. It is now 12:58 p.m. We beat the 1-hour goal that I didn't tell you about. But yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Terrific job.